In this video, we are going to be addressing some pre-configuration tasks that needs to be completed before we can configure an instance of PyInterface for OPCTA. First, we need to check the time and time zone settings on both the PyData archive and PyInterface node. Secondly, we need to test for the PySDK type of connection from the designated interface node to the PyData archive. Likewise, we need to test the PyAPI connection as well. And finally, we need to test from the designated PyInterface node to the data source as well. First, let's talk about time and time zone settings and see why it is important that they are in sync. It is important to stress that PyData archive stores timestamps in UTC. For that purpose, we need to make sure that the time and time zone settings are set properly on both those machines. So let's assume a situation where the time on the PyData archive is 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Likewise, the time on the PyInterface node is also set to 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. In such a situation, there won't be any problem and data will be archived on the PyData archive. Now, let's have another situation where the time on the PyData archive is set to 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, but on the interface node it is 9:11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. In such a situation, PyData archive cannot accept data more than 10 minutes in the future, thus data will be rejected. So we need to make sure that the time and time zones are set properly on both PyData archive and PyInterface node. Now let's go to the designated PyInterface node, namely PyInt1, in order to test the PySDK and PyAPI connections to the PyData archive and also test the connection to the data source. Now let's first test the PySDK connection from PyInt1 node, which is the PyInterface node, to the PyData archive. So to do this, let's go to Start, All Programs, PySystem, and choose the application called About PySDK. Make sure that you have selected connections and check the PyData archive which you are interested in. In our case, we have only one, which is PySRV1. In here, it basically says we have a successful connection and we are using Windows Integrated Security using the domain account. Now, let's go to the PyData archive to find out how we can audit connections made to the PyData archive. So let's minimize this and go to PySRV1. Once in PySRV1, let's open up PySystem Management Tools by going to Start, All Programs, PySystem, and selecting PySystem Management Tools. Now open Operations and select the plugin called Network Manager Statistics. With this plugin, you would be able to audit all successful connections to the PyData archive. If I scroll down, there is the application which is called PySDK It says it's a remote connection, and it also says this is the IP address of the node as well. And now if I scroll to the right, it will also give me information on how we are actually connecting to the PyData archive. Here it basically says we are using the Windows Integrated Security. Now that we have tested the PySDK connection, let's test the PyAPI connection as well from the designated PyInterface node, which is PyInt1. So let's go back to PyInt1 and open up the command prompt. Now to test the API based connection from the PyInt1 node, go to Start, select Run, and type cmd and open up a command prompt. And we need to navigate to the 32-bit PyPC folder. So cd space, we can type pyhome, It has taken us to the 32-bit PyPC folder. Let's navigate to the subfolder called bin And here we need to execute a command called API snap, API snap, one word. And let's select enter. It is going to connect to the PyData archive, which is PySRV1. Now we can query a tag. So let's query a tag. We have a default tag called CDT158, and click enter, and we are successfully getting values from the PyData archive. Now once more, let's go to the PyData archive to make sure that we are connecting to the PyData archive and how we are able to connect to the PyData archive as well. So let's minimize this and let's go to PySRV1. Once in PySRV1, let's open up PySystem Management Tools from all programs, PySystem, and selecting PySystem Management Tools. Now under operations, let's select Network Manager Statistics and scroll to the bottom, and you will find an application called SNAP capital E, which is an API type of connection, which is also coming from the particular node, which is the IP 192.168.0.6. Now let's see how we are able to connect. So if I scroll to the right, lo and behold, it is coming via the PyTrust, which we just created, and it is using the PyIdentity called PyReader. So with these two activities, we have tested both PySDK and PyAPI connection to the PyData archive from the designated PyInterface node, which is PyInt1. Now let's go back to the designated PyInterface node and test the connection to the data source. Let's minimize this. On PyInt1, you will note that there is an application called OPC client.exe on the desktop. Kindly right click and select Run as Administrator. This is a standalone application utility. With this utility, you can utilize to check connections to the OPC server, which is the data source. Kindly note that in our case, we have an OPC server simulator running on the same machine as the designated PyInterface node, which is PyInt1. We have selected localhost, which is indicated here. We are trying to test connection to OPC servers which are residing on the same machine. Now let's click this button to establish connection. So it exposes the OPC servers. So let's select this OPC server, double click, which should highlight this button, yellow button at the top. Click on the yellow button and click create. Now click this button to explore the contents of the OPC server. Once we click on that, it's going to open up another window. Double click on the OPC server and expand. Let's select pump 1. Click the select all button, and also then click on the add selected button. This will give you all the tags which are residing on the data source, and click OK. And finally, once you are on the screen, we need to click refresh to query the values from the data source by clicking on this button. So once I click that, it is going to query the data source, and it is saying these are good quality values and these are all the values. Now in this video, we have basically identified the importance of setting the time and time zone properly on both the PyData archive and PyInterface nodes, and we did some pre-checks, namely testing the connection to the PyData archive using PySDK and PyAPI from the designated PyInterface node, and we also tested the connection to the data source as well.